everyone. This is a brief podcast introducing you to this PowerPoint, and maybe I will manage to make it clear why I see that learning about neuroscience and evidence from the fields that are empirically interested in identifying the conditions that support our thinking and learning is important for pedagogy. In any case, we need to go beyond references like Vygotsky, which is 1926, or even Brunner, which is the 50s and the 70s. There's a lot that has been done recently due to improvements in technology. So I think that I collected enough of evidence here just to help you enrich your current understanding of how people learn, and also what that implies for the pedagogy of reading. So the introductory page here is just for decoration, but I inserted here a text that says we act on our beliefs, not on absolute, clear and transparent external stimuli. I'll come back to this point, but in our colloquial language, what do we say? We don't see what is, we see as we are, right? So we see as we are, not as is. So how we are impacts on what we see and how we interpret things. We known that for a while, and we have no evidence for it. So I'll come back to this and to this picture here. A few points I made here that summarize the findings inside of this PowerPoint. So people are different. True, we know it from genetics. We also know it from cultural studies. And as a result, people need personalized support. We need personalized support because the way we approach problems depends on how we see the problems, how we understand. And this means it depends on our past, on our experiences. So in order to understand something, we need to deal with the problem from our perspective, not from someone else's perspective. It doesn't mean that discussing with other people is a bad thing, but it does mean that it may not be enough. So please here read a little bit about it, what I have written. Now another point here is that in a good pedagogy, students solve their problems. Right? So this is very important, not arbitrarily designed learning tasks. So we will get back to this point when we talk about the techniques for supporting reading, but it makes sense to you. As you are trying to understand what I'm saying now, you are approaching it from the perspective of the questions you have in your individual heads, not from the meta questions that everyone has in their heads. So some things I've written here that might help you think a little bit more about these three principles that are mentioned in these 3 points here. Now, I've described them with Amy Norman from Perap Primary when we wrote together a paper, and you will have aspects of it in your literature, in the modules. So you will be able to actually read some more about it. But I also inserted here a little bit of a summary in terms of some points from research. So the first principle is principle that comes from neuroscience, and I inserted here the picture of Dr. Imodino Yang. She works with people in San Diego and also with people in Harvard, two of a few key centers in neuroscience in America. So we've evolved interpreting systems on top of our emotional systems. I expand on it inside of the PowerPoint in the next few slides. But what it means is that we do not interpret things. First, we had a limbic system that enabled us to react to things emotionally. Then we started to create some abstract associations about the world. This is a body, this is my hand, this is a cup, But the way we understand the cup, the body, and any other objects we've named, we understand them in relation to emotions. So the body comes to us with particular feelings, with particular associations. So nature doesn't create new systems in your brain because it wants to, because it's time to do so. It builds on already present structures like emotions. And in this way, we gain richer understandings of the world, whereby we don't just react, but we have more abstract systems connected to our emotional systems. And in this way, we have more information. And we have a possibility to manage our emotions. And this management of emotions comes up in the general capabilities, as you know. Perception is problem solving. We have here this aha. I got it from V.S. Ramachandran. So he's probably the biggest star, or one of the biggest stars in neuroscience. And we learned about it a little bit already when we were doing our assignment 1. So, for example, some of our students were evaluating a literacy activity, for example, creating promotional material for their business or for their organization. How do you do that? You need to gather information to solve a problem, right? So the perception of what's important comes from gathering information, and this gathering information is important. So when our students want to create something, a brochure, a website, a book, anything, a poster, they can't create it from nowhere. They need to gather information, because to see something, to detect something as important, requires gathering of information. So perception, what we see, is not a process that is direct. It's a process that relies on how we see the world. Thinking is a forward-looking activity. It's goal-oriented. We always aim. I'm talking to you, so I'm aiming to get this thing done relatively clearly, aesthetically pleasing, all of these things. I'm trying to reduce my Polish accent as much as I can, speak slowly, all of that. When I stand up, after I finish, I will aim to go maybe to make myself coffee. Then I will aim to do something else. We're aiming, goal-orienting creatures. We always aim. So our thinking is towards problem solving, and our thinking is always forward. So when we think backwards, we think in a manner that enables us to, in retrospect, so gather information from the past in order to solve problems which are now at hand, right? So even when we draw on information from the past, it is to solve something that is actually at hand or in the future. What I integrate depends on how I construct the goal, right? So we need to gather information about the aim. What does the problem mean, right? What does creating a brochure mean? Well, you then learn how to do this by evaluating what it takes to create a brochure, what it takes to create something which is not a brochure, maybe something similar to a brochure, like a flyer, or what about a little gazette? In what way they are similar and in what way they are different. So we can see that an act of problem solving is an act that depends on the amount and the quality of information we've gathered. What I see as me is socially constructed. Right. But it doesn't mean that the process of social construction began with your birth, right? Because you have a brain which is relatively large, probably one of the largest brains ever in human evolution, but that took social history, which means that social history began billions of years ago, not just with your birth. And that's very important, because we have a lot of knowledge inside of our bodies that came to us with evolution, and in order to help us survive. So yes, what we see is socially constructed. We interpret waves of light in a way that helps us to actually manage life in the way that humans do. But that didn't begin with your birth, so that's very important. What we draw on is our own experience, right? So even though our experience is it's in social contexts, it doesn't matter if you sat all day on your own, you're still in a social context. But it is still constructed or developed by you, right? So you cannot remove an individual from a social context, because we are not just a sum total of cells that is one brain. We're many brains, and that's very important, right? Because that's where the value is of everyone's perspective, of everyone's thinking, because we're many brains, not just one brain. And we learn by relating, not recording information. This is extremely important. There's research on amnesia, which is amnesia is an illness where you have a problem with memory. And what they found out that people who have amnesia, they have no problem remembering lists. So if you give someone like me a list of 14 items, I will be hard pressed to remember the 14 items. You give a list to someone with amnesia, they will be flying, no problem. I used to spend more time on this aspect in my literacy units or programs, but there's so much more information now that I've collected over the years that I'll just speak about it in briefly. So in classrooms, and I obviously one of my key expertises is to teach languages. Very often we've been given, or we give to students, vocabulary lists. I'm not against vocabulary lists, but what I am against is seeing them as the means for learning vocabulary, right? There's more in the world and more strategies we can invent for learning vocabulary than just giving to students lists that only people who have no memory can remember. What people do, they relate information, right? Perception is problem solving, is about gathering information. We integrate, we relate. And in a sense, not in a sense, and in every sense, we don't learn by constructing information, but by reconstructing. This is another point that I'll come back to. So over the years you've been listening, or you will be hearing still, people say, oh, people construct information. Actually, people reconstruct information. Quite interesting, right? So if you give to a person with amnesia a picture, and there is an orange juice, like in here, on it, a newspaper and a cup of coffee, and maybe a croissant. So there's a table with white cloth, and there is a coffee cup, orange juice, and a croissant or some bun. And you tell them to tell a story about this table. You do it in no time. You'd say breakfast. They would say, well, there is a cup, there is a glass. There is a cup, there is a glass, and there is a croissant. There you go. They can't put things together. They can't organize information. They can't relate. All good, but not all of you might have thought about breakfast, right? Seeing a table with an orange juice and a croissant. Could have been afternoon tea. Could have been just someone's bedroom where they left stuff. So you can see that making sense of things is an act of reconstruction according to the memories or the experiences that a particular context brings up in us. And this is the key for creativity. We'll come back to it, right? Had we all thought of breakfast and thought the same and reacted the same, that would have made impossible for human beings to be creative, to see things differently, and to build things differently as a result. So You can read this text for yourselves, but already the principles that I've written in the previous, that we have seen in the previous slide, make you see that the entire set of evidences that I've collected in this PowerPoint only affirms the relevance of learner-centered models of teaching. And learner-centered doesn't only mean that students manage their learning, but it also means that we actually make it possible for the students to manage their learning. Too often in the literature I see the concept of learner-centeredness being putting the responsibility on the learning on the student, and very little understanding there is in the literature of what it means for the teacher. And the teacher needs to make this learner-centered model of learning possible. We will discuss it probably a little bit in here, but definitely in the sections of this module where we talk about primary and middle school learning. Now, in your English classes when you were at school, you probably were taught, and quite correctly, but metaphor is something not literal. But when we actually look from the perspective of culture or cultural studies, which often we name as semiotics. Semiotics is a study of meaning, and the study of meaning can only happen when we also examine how people use meanings or words, or how people make sense of things within particular context of culture. So metaphors are not just something not literal, but actually nothing is literal. Now, I don't want to be too totalitarian here, so let's say almost nothing is literal. And you can read it for yourselves here, but this is very important because the way we use words and the words we use and the way we understand words, we take it for granted. We very often, not until we learn another language, or is, I guess, more like not until we learn another language, we recognize how hard it is to understand and to control vocabulary, because we make direct translations and they don't work, and they don't work because what's included in the word, the kind of experiences, the kind of cultural experiences, they're very different between languages. And that's why no word is an island. It is already a set of many meanings. So here, this particular scholar, he's a son actually of a Nobel Prize winner. Not that it makes him famous, but he is famous because of this and also on his own accord. He gave an example of a hub or even Wikipedia, right? So Wikipedia is not a word, it's a conglomerate of words. A lot of words are in it, a lot of concepts. So each concept has many concepts inside of them. That's extremely important. But it comes back to how we were thinking in assignment 1 of any literacy activity. So creating promotional material means gathering information about how other people do it and what things are and what things are not, so that we can better understand the meaning of promotional materials, right? The meaning. We had it here somewhere, right? How we construct the goal. How we construct the goal. So the meaning of promotional materials, we get that only by making these comparisons, evaluating things, and then creatively constructing something that works for our goals, right? So too often in literacy classes, students are given examples of how things are done and say, well, do exactly as it is in here. Well, that's what you do with a chimpanzee, but that's not what you do with human beings. They can't relate, they can't understand. By seeing a thing, they can't see anything. They have to see more of the same and more of not the same, so that they can reconstruct and relate and evaluate and understand what matters, so that they can create something that is relevant to their goal. So there's something for you to read. So here is this bit about how our emotions connect with with the words or with the way we name the world, right? So you can read about it. Our emotions are many, and our experiences of the world are many. So when we think of a cup, we just don't think of one experience and not just one emotion that is brought up with it, but maybe many other associations. Cup could be an afternoon tea with people, cup could be the breakfast, cup could be a ceramic that we enjoy in the museum, or collect beautiful cups at home. I collect cups. I like nice ceramic, so I've got nice things at home. So there are many emotions and many experiences that engage these emotions. We are rich creatures. This is exactly why we do not give students or children templates to imitate, but we expose them to many resources, so resource-based learning. We expose them to many resources so that they can perceive things and experience things emotionally and in multiple dimensions or ways, and in this way to make richer understandings of the problem they're trying to solve or things they do. So here we start with this little arrow here. So what happens here, please read about it. So you read this, and then you read this. So what do we have? We have a person perceiving something. So the light hits her eye, but notice that this pink arrow is not going through her eye into her brain, getting somewhere and so on, like we would like to say, right? We have this linear understanding of the world, that things come into our eye and then they trigger something in the brain, which is exactly the place where we store this particular thing that we see. Well, it doesn't work like this, and it'd be really bad if it did work this way, because how would you see the things you haven't seen before? Right? So what the way how the brain works with predictions. So a lot of these pink arrows, they are higher level systems, and notice that all of them work somehow to bring information into the eye from inside of the brain, not from outside, not from the external world. This is really interesting. And however the process works, for us as teachers, it means you can't fight the inner experience, you have to work with students' inner experiences. And very often we are said in schools to be explicit. Now, this is very important, and I often also talk about it. For example, I say that when you integrate, say, any of the capabilities, you explicitly name the things that our learning is showing us that we are learning, right? So you need to know that you're learning as you are learning. You need to know that you're achieving as you are achieving, right? So it's important. This is what it's called synthesis. This is what it's called analysis. And you discuss with children things, and then you say, well, this is what it means to self-manage or manage your emotions, right? You do that. But not everything in the world you can explain. So where you put these explicit namings, it may not necessarily be right at the front. Even so, it all matters when and how. So explaining things to children, right? When you explain, you create a text, and the text is an answer to the questions you have in your head, or you think they have, but it never is an explanation, an answer to the questions each and every student has in their head, right? So when we explain things, we produce a narrative that we construct according to the questions we think someone else might have in their head. But what we think of those questions, that these questions are, and what these questions actually are not the same thing. So getting upset that students might not understand our explanations and so on, there's no need for it. They shouldn't understand them. In fact, if they understand them, it's a miracle. Then we should rejoice it. but we need to insert into a learning environment complex conditions enabling each and every child to relate to what they need to learn, rather than dismissing children who might not be participating, who might not be responding to our questions. I call very often this questioning, this eternal questionings by the teacher, an interrogation. We need to diversify the way how children are enabled to solve problems, so that they have many chances of exploring their own questions and find answers to their questions. And this is a slide I just added now. It's not in that big PowerPoint where we have where we have videos inside of it, but never mind. So here are some things I have inserted. We are multisensory. We have many senses, and those many senses work in a. They bring information from all parts of our body into our brain, and a rich environment, enabling children to relate to their own or find answers to their own questions, should provide students with learning techniques that tackle all their senses. Now, this is next slide. I here have the lecture, or the bit of the lecture, where Professor Jordan Peterson actually.
Anyways, okay, so how does the brain work? Well, the left, roughly speaking, in right-handed males, and the reason that I'm concentrating on right-handed males is because they're simpler in their neurological structure.
Right, so I have inserted this clip that is important for hearing Jordan Peterson about how the brain works. Now, you have links right here, so you can listen to him online. You don't have to actually download the PowerPoint, which has videos. But basically what he's saying, where do I have it? All right. So please read it for yourselves. But basically what he's saying is that when something new hits our brain and we are healthy, so we didn't have a stroke in our right hand hemisphere, the following happens. When it's something new, information basically goes into a surprise happens in the right hemisphere. It kind of like we get startled, even even if it does take a fraction of a millisecond, we get startled. So we stop, then the brain starts generating many hypotheses, and it sort of thinks, what could it be? What could it be, right? And then it starts organizing and reorganizing. Remember those arrows going crazily? So there's an interaction between different lower order thinking systems and higher order thinking systems. Higher order thinking systems obviously are connections between many things, and lower order could be something like, for example, pitch in someone's speech, or it could be what else is in the speech? Maybe the height, maybe I don't know, whatever, something really rhythm. Could be just a word that maybe seemed like out of place or something. So lower level systems contain very little information. Higher order systems have lots of information. There's an interaction between them, and together they tell the eye what it sees. So what Peterson is saying, that interaction in the right hand hemisphere begins with that interaction begins in the right hand hemisphere, because the left hemisphere knows everything. If you have a stroke in your right hemisphere, you are a happy person. You walk around and you know everything. Like older people, sometimes we have jokes in Poland. Older people just sit there and just have an answer for everything, know it all. Right, and it's a happy hemisphere, and it really is. When you have a stroke in your right hemisphere, you're always happy. When you have a stroke in your left hemisphere, you're always unhappy, because the right hemisphere has a predilection for depression. It's the one that gets startled, oh my God, what do I do with this, right? Now, Imagine if you work with children, and if you actually did read my critique of Ockerman when she is that text that she produced on the bad answer, who is afraid of the big bad answer or something like this. And what they did, they took children who already had reading difficulties. So they took this group of children and they told them, well, this is a remedial class, so how will we deal with you? We will just give you a book and we'll tell you to read. So if you can't walk and you have difficulties with walking, I'll make you walk. Right? What will happen to you? If you were my mother who is disabled, you would just cry and refuse, right? Because it's more pain. But Ockerman doesn't think about it. She's focusing on something that things should be helpful for children. But what she's not asking herself is why a remedial class, reading class, should start with reading a text. So, and another thing, so when children are reading, they already hitting the children who have already difficulties with reading. So they're sitting in the right hemisphere. It's really pounding. There's a fear there because right hemisphere says, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And now one child in that group with Ockerman says, well, I don't know, or something to this effect. So why this discussion with children about what they understand about the text and what they don't, it's not bad. But if they're in a remedial class and we already know they have problems, how many questions did they have before one of them said, well, I think differently? Now, what she does, she lets it go, and then children sort of come back to this question again. But how many things did we drop? You know, when we think of vocabulary as metaphors, which means sets of many understandings just in one word, what chances did Ockerman create for her children to break down things for themselves, let alone to play, right? Let alone playing. I mean, they're not playing, they're sitting there, right hemisphere pounding, they're in fear, and one person dares to say something, and there's no conditions put in place or no strategies put in place for children to break down what they know, what they don't know, and make themselves explore somehow. Where do they know the information, this thing from? Where else have they seen it? Compare, contrast, evaluate. None of that. All they have is what they generated in that little room where the teacher told them, whatever you will get out of this text is whatever will pop out from your little conversation here. Very poor environment and very stressful. Very stressful. And there is a long tradition in education that neuroscience has been looked at negatively at. Why? I have no idea, because they think everything is social. Well, if everything is social, the fact that when children don't know something, that the right hemisphere, which is the fear feeling hemisphere, is, screaming, that would have been a useful, it's not only shared between all other people, but it would have been a useful information to actually have. It is an important hemisphere, generates learning, but you cannot overload it in the right hemisphere because people will get into anxiety, just like, right? So we need to think a little bit of how to actually draw best on the functions of each of the hemispheres, and we will be learning about it throughout the module. At the bottom here, I've written some implications of what Jordan Peterson talks about, and I am pretty sure that in the literature all of you will find things like asking comprehension questions, and I get it quite often in students' assignments. We've discussed it so far, the value of that or lack of it, but let's have a look at the verbs here. So we need to put in place conditions that enable students to. So they enable students, right? So they bring out something from the students, some need to question themselves. It's very different than us interrogating them. So we will do, and we will show it in this module how to do it. I will teach you this. But the principle is putting in place conditions that enable students to question So the students are questioning their own conclusions. Is my hypothesis right? Did they get it right? How do they do it? By comparing and contrasting with some other resources and ways of how people do things. So they throw out new hypotheses, new images in their head. Well, maybe it looks like this. Differentiate them. What's the process of differentiating? The process of differentiating is the process of categorizing. These things are not as overtly transparent to us, because when we think, we do it so fast, and sometimes we do it better and sometimes we do it worse. But differentiation requires categorization in relation to the goal. So in relation to the goal, this means what? So for example, when we compare, say, if we want to do promotional materials, and some of those materials will include, say, let's say, brochures. So when our students are learning, are comparing, say, the structures of a genre of a flyer or of a brochure versus some gazette, right? So they go, oh my goodness, one is long and not organizing, the other one is short and organized, short and very well organized, very well structured. Has headings, for example, and has particular things. All brochures have particular things in common. So students generate categories in their heads for differentiating the ways in which they organize information, and right. So look how many verbs we have here, and that's way more than just answering teachers' questions, right? So they enable them to question their conclusions, throw out hypotheses and images, differentiate, play with them. Play is not just play. One aspect of play is to gather information, right? But it is kind of less structured and more like intuitive, reflexive almost. Like when you search things or browse the internet, you kind of don't have a hypothesis of how to do it. You sort of go here and maybe here, maybe here, maybe here, right? You sort of do these searches, and that's really important. So you can see, in order for the left hemisphere to be allowed to support students' learning, you need to allow the the right hand hemisphere to produce, to generate those images, hypotheses, and play with them and organize, categorize them, right? And these are some of the implications of what Jordan Peterson talks about. And here in this slide, we have a few comments here. I would just mention them just to broaden your understanding of what's in this PowerPoint. And that would be helpful. So when we overload the left hemisphere, we can that can result in a burnout, because what happens, we rely on what students know, right? And this is what very often is said in the literature, how students learn by drawing on what they know. But in fact, what we need to do is to enable them to draw on what they don't know. As crazy as it may sound, that's what the right hemisphere, the creative hemisphere, is for, to actually generate what it doesn't know yet, right? And hypothesize and think and be creative, right? So overloading the left hemisphere, how long can you beat the dead horse, right? So when we draw on what they know and we keep explaining to them and explaining, it can result in a burnout. Not only that, all right, we'll just leave it here. So bypassing left hemisphere and targeting the right hemisphere could be a good thing for research. Now, this is a little bit postgraduate at this very moment, but I'm making you aware of it. And some work of this I've done, and some of this work has been done by my husband in area of pronunciation teaching in, I think in English he teaches, and in French he used to, but we have pretty good work done in English. But yes, so this is the area for research, and this is the area for other people to think about how to do it. So you can do it intuitively, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, because you can just now hypothesize and think and imagine some crazy ideas, and that's great. That's how we develop innovation, when I can give you a principle, like, can you think of some ways of bypassing the left hemisphere and just going to the right hemisphere straight, so that to stimulate that sort of generation of ideas, so that the student doesn't get stuck first in what they know. So that's research. So how do we do it? By engaging innate circuits. So in your brain you have some circuits. I think that you have about 9 circuits. So Jack Panksepp is here. I think it's double P. Jack Panksepp, a person, he's dead already, but didn't make it much into the education literature for some reason. I don't know why. One of the most famous people on affective neuroscience, on play. He is the god of play, right? Jack Panksepp. So he's done a good work. But anyway, he's identified 9 circuits that you have in your brain, like hunger, like sex, like what else is there? Right, thirst, all of those, but also play. Play is the circuit that is extremely important for your psychological development and also for your social development. But another circuit that is, in fact, even more important than play is seeking or exploration. Right? The only time when you don't seek or explore is when you are in coma. Right? And then it's also rewards and punishment circuit. This is a very good circuit too, but it's not like in behaviorism, when they didn't have enough evidence, they thought that people function on rewards and punishment, whereas what Panksepp has found out, that in fact reward is a great circuit, but behavioristic training was not really ever behavioristic in a clean way. It involved evaluation. So when people were trying to compare and contrast things, they were always doing evaluation. The problem with behaviorism was, because they didn't understand how this evaluation happens, they didn't provide for students good enough conditions for reward and punishment methods of teaching to also engage seeking or exploration. Without compare and contrast and evaluate, your evaluation systems are poorly informed, right? So that's not very good. Imagine you have a child and you put the child in a room which has just only one toy. You would be sued for child abuse, right? What we need to have is many toys, many stimuli, many ways through which child can actually connect with the world and with others. So that's why exploration and richness of an environment, learning how to produce things by comparing and contrasting how other texts are done and how they look like and what's their structure and what do they feel like and why this way and why not the other way, right? Enable students to actually generate questions, however crazy, because that engages them. Right, so I'll finish here with this. Let's have a look what's in the. So here we have Peterson's video if you wanted to watch. I mean, I've given you links here, but here is just the direct. It's just the video fully when he talks about it. I strongly advise you actually take some time and listen to him. He explains it so well. Now you can read here a little bit about the exploratory system, some more. Right, so when we talk about the right hand hemisphere, and when we talk about fear, he defines it quite well. It's an awareness or a feeling you get when you are not able to deal with a goal. Just read it for yourselves, and that's quite nice. Then we have this summarized again here. Right, what I tried to do is to identify the blocks of the process of construction. you are aware that I talk about reconstruction as a process of learning, not construction, right? But if we were to sort of stay with this word of building, what are the building blocks of that building process, of building or rebuilding? And these things will emerge or will be present in teaching reading strategies that I will be teaching in this module. So different ways, features or ways or techniques or strategies that help students see things differently. Oh my goodness, this is how it looked like. How do you see it now? Oh my God, why didn't I see it before? And can you see it now? Oh, this is even different. Now I can see it better, right? So you show the same thing but differently, and all of a sudden this helps students see a particular structure in fuller dimensions. Emotional intentions, building blocks of the construction process, right? So emotional intentions. Very rarely people talk about emotional intentions. We will do some work on that. Challenge, the notion of challenge. I've been teaching the notion of challenge for years, and this is only just recently coming up as critical to inspire learning, because challenge means what? Problem. And perception, seeing things and being able to construct or reconstruct things, organize things in your head, is a response to a problem, right? So thinking is a response to a problem. Learning is a response to a problem. So challenge is important. Technology will be helping us a lot in this, because not everything can be done with the mouth. Like we have books, so why can't we use technology for similar reasons or even more? We will also consider when to help students to see things better, how things change across the time, and also how location makes a difference as well. So we've got a few sort of features here written up so that like on a side we'll see how much and where they will appear in our module. But some things I've identified here. Obviously I didn't exhaust them. You can actually come up with some other features that actually can help, we can integrate into our teaching strategies for reading. Now this is funny thing here, this is just to finish. You can read those dialogues for yourselves, but what these dialogues actually from Professor Ramachandran, from his article, illustrated what happens to a person when they actually have the right hemisphere turned off as a result of a stroke. You can ask a person to clap hands and they will swear they are clapping, and yet they're not clapping, they're actually moving only one hand and not the other, and they will be explaining to you how much they were clapping with both hands, and it's all good, right? So, or tying shoes and things like that. So I just put it for you in case you are interested, because some examples from the literature are quite interesting. So even though it's a medical literature, it's actually not as hard to read as some might believe. I just found this article here by Jack Panksepp. I actually have his two books, but there's an article by Jack Panksepp, and this is very interesting because if you find these things on, I can't show it to you. Just try my best. On NCBI website, all these medical articles are for free, so you don't even need the library to read it. And if you actually want to have a look at the genre of it, obviously when you read it first time it sounds like, difficult, but after a while what you need out of it you will get. Look at this, how he's talking about seeking networks, which is exploratory networks all the time. So yeah, so that's great, and you can read the whole article and you get out of it what you need, right? So that's great. And then also what these journals have, well, not all of them, but say these ones, which is called, this particular one is called Dialogues Clinical Neuroscience. So I'll show it to you how I got it. Dialogues Clinical Neuroscience. So look at this. When you find one article, I just typed on Google Jack Panksepp, and I got this article just instantly. And look, you've got other articles on similar issues, right? And you can actually, and once you choose one, then there will be other ones and other ones and other ones, and you can browse actually for things that might interest you. You may not think it's necessary today for your learning of how to teach reading, but if you get into it, and if you ever are more interested after the semester finishes or when your studies finish, at least you learn that things like this exist and you could actually browse, and it is actually available freely online. So where did I yeah, there's another one here, Selected Principles of Panksippian Affective Neuroscience. So I typed, okay, this is what I typed: rewards activate evaluation circuits, Panksip, and I got all these things here like that, so yeah. But a good thing is to know that those medical journals are free, available through Google, and then you can go to different, like I can go here and click on it and get the whole article here. And this is also by Jack Panksepp. So far so good for neuroscience. I think this kind of gives you some words and some understandings about what's happening in neuroscience and what people are busy with, and how it actually gives us a little bit of evidence for thinking about pedagogy and for thinking about how to teach reading. And the rest of the module would be just practical translations of the principles that I explained in here. Thank you.